Welcome to the channel. My name is Steven and I'm glad you stopped by. I hope you enjoy the video, so let's get right to it. Let me start by talking about the history that occurred prior to the blast from the past that I will get to. So, go all the way back to the summer of 1971. A young lady and I met at the summer youth camp through our church. She was 13, I was 14. We were attracted to one another, which led to us spending what time we could together doing things like playing badminton, ping pong, volleyball, and other things that were various activities that were available to us. And basically, we continued over the next 3 years writing back and forth during the year and then seeing each other again the following year at the youth camp. We were never physical in any way, shape, or form because the young people were pretty heavily supervised by the adult counselors to make sure that we were never able to get together in a manner that was inappropriate. So the girls had their own dormitory and a number of counselors that were responsible for the girls. I don't remember what the ratio was, but it seemed like it was significant that there was probably one counselor for every half a dozen or so of the youth. And the boys, had a similar arrangement, their own dormitory, separate from the girls and counselors. And so you weren't really able to get out of your dormitory except for various activities that were scheduled. It was close to impossible to sneak out and get together outside of the supervision of the counselors. So anyway, we write back and forth, and it was, they were all innocent letters back and forth. I don't remember how many letters there actually were over the span of the year, but I would guess that there was somewhere between 5 and 6 letters that back then there was no such thing as email, obviously. So, in the time it would take for her to write a letter and then get it in the mail and get to me and me read it and formulate a response and send it back to her, probably 3 to 4 weeks from the time she sat down to write her letter to the time that she received my response. And so I would guess over the span of a year, maybe a dozen letters were sent back and forth over the course of a year. And then of course we would meet up again the following summer for the week that the camp was in session. And out of that entire week, her and I might actually be in each other's company for a grand total of 4 to 6 hours a week, because when there was a meeting that everybody attended, worship meetings and so forth, there were 2 or 3 of those a day, and we were not permitted to sit together in those meetings, so that wasn't time that we were able to be together. And then when we were playing volleyball, of course, usually I was on one side of the net and she was on the other, but matter of fact, I remember the volleyball field was up on the big athletic field, which was kind of up a hill behind the church buildings. Pretty good sized field too. And the volleyball court was, there were benches on one side of the court, and then on the other side of the court were half a dozen good sized rocks, just about the right size to be able to sit on one and watch volleyball together. And then right behind those rocks was woods. And I remember her and I going over to those rocks and sitting down, and we weren't over there more than a minute, and the counselors came over and said, y'all need to go back over onto the benches on the other side of the court And of course, over there, the boys were together and the girls were together. We didn't have the ability to sit with each other. So we really didn't have a whole lot of time during the week to spend with each other than the occasional game of badminton or the game of ping pong. That was pretty much it. I remember her telling me that she and a friend of hers during the meal times, as many of the girls did, they were responsible for serving the meals to the various tables, and the tables were good size tables in the dining hall that held probably a dozen or more people at the table. And she intentionally set out to be assigned to the table that I was sitting at whenever she could, just as a means of her putting herself in the vicinity of me for us to be able to, if nothing else, just exchange glances as she was there. It's kind of funny. I didn't know about that until years later, when we eventually reestablished contact through a new technology called Facebook. More on that a little bit later. But anyway, over the course of those 3 years, between the 3 summer camps during that span of time and the letters back and forth, and when I turned 17 and she was then 16, I decided to join the military, and so I went off to basic training in South Carolina. And the plan was that once I got to my permanent duty station after basic training, which I knew when I enlisted that where that duty station was going to be, and it happened to be that it was just a few hours drive from that base down to where she was living with her mother and father. So anyway, after basic training was over, I went home on leave while en route to my new duty station. And it was during that visit home that my parents sat me down and told me that the church leadership had contacted them, and that the orders were that I was not to contact her ever again, and should I decide to defy that, then there would be trouble. They did not elaborate on what trouble meant. They just basically impressed upon me that it would not be a good idea for me to defy it, that I should just accept it and go on with my life. And of course, I had no idea why that had happened. The only thing that came to my mind, of course, was that for whatever reason, she had decided she no longer wanted to be in any kind of a relationship with me, and that it was best just to break it off clean. Of course, I did not think at the time, that how strange it was that she would go to the church leadership, and in turn they would go to my parents, who in turn would sit me down and lay down the law. To me, it didn't really make sense, but it was what it was. So I had no choice but to accept it. So I went on to my duty station, and as instructed, I never did make any more contact with her. That's the way it was. So fast forward 41 years, I log on to Facebook to deal with something. I had not logged on to Facebook for probably 15 months at that point. And the first thing that I see was a message from this young lady who is now considerably older. And in her message, she is asking me if I'm the same Stephen that knew her back at the summer camp in our youth. And I, of course, replied, yes, I am. And that started a dialogue of getting reacquainted. Learned a few things in the process of that, one of which was that our being separated from one another was not her idea. In fact, it had been her mother that had intervened and called the head of the church and told him that a plan was in the works for me to come visit her daughter, and she told him that she was not in favor of that and wanted to put a stop to it. So that is what led to the phone call to my parents, and that basically is why we fell out of contact for 40 some odd years. Further discussion, I find out that she had reached out to 10 different people with the same name as mine, who also appeared to be approximately the right age, asking that same question, and she said that she had received one reply that they were not that person, and the other messages she had sent out, she had received no reply to any of those until I replied some 14-15 months after she had initially sent out that query. So anyway, it was interesting getting to know each other again, mostly by sending email back and forth and one or two phone calls. I had told her that I was married and had 4 children of my own, and that I was still married to the same woman that I had married back when I was 18. And I found out that she was on her 3rd marriage. The previous 2 had failed, and the 3rd one, she was having, she said it was very rocky, although she said she was committed to trying to make it work. Ultimately, it did not work, and she ended up getting a divorce. She is now, as she puts it, happily single. I doubt that she will ever get into another relationship based on some of the things that we discussed. It just doesn't sound to me like she's interested in getting involved again. She, from the words of her own mouth, said that she is a man hater, that there are only 2 men in her entire life that had not hurt her, one being her father and the other being me. The sad part about the whole thing was, had her mother not done what she had done, you just never know what might have been from that relationship. But because of her mother's interference and subsequently the church interference, I had nothing to go on other than I was not to contact her ever again, and so that is what I did. I got to my new duty station, and as much as I would have liked to have gone down and seen her, based on what I was told, I had to put that aside and move on with my life, and so that's what I did. I eventually met my current wife, and that's another story, kind of interesting how that occurred, but ultimately she and I got married and started a family of our own, and we've been together. Well, we got married in 1976, and we've been together ever since. So who knows what could have been, but ultimately, had that not occurred, I wouldn't have met my wife. So that's the life that I ended up with, and it's been a happy life for the most part. I mean, no marriage is perfect, and certainly ours was not perfect throughout the years, but we've managed to work through our issues and stayed together, which as I understand it, statistically 50% of the marriages fail, and we've managed to survive and keep ours together. I'm now retired, and my wife and I are surviving on Social Security, and we're not rich by any means, but we're far better off than a lot of people. So that's that story, and the young lady and I remain friends. We talk periodically. My wife has never actually met her, but has been involved in the conversations that she and I have had the few times that we have talked, and I think we will remain friends given the circumstances and so forth. So that's about it. Once again, thank you for watching. If you like the video, I'd appreciate it if you'd mash that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so that you don't miss any future videos. Thank you.